Throughout the vast majority of human history, our species was not alone on this planet. If it were somehow possible to travel back roughly 50,000 years, you would arrive on an Earth that looked nothing like the one we know today, a world where multiple distinct forms of humans roamed at the same time, each shaped by millions of years of pressure, climate, and survival. Some of these beings would appear almost familiar to a modern eye. Others would seem entirely foreign. A few were compact and powerfully built, molded by freezing temperatures into forms built for endurance. One group evolved in such extreme isolation on a remote island that its members never grew taller than 3 feet. Another remains so poorly understood by science that almost everything researchers know about them traces back to a single fragment of finger bone. And somewhere in that mix, there was us Homo sapiens, the species reading these words today. We are, at this point, the only human species remaining on Earth. Not because we were the toughest, or possessed the largest brains, or had been around the longest. Simply because we are the ones who did not disappear. That reality raises a question without a comfortable answer. Where did everyone else go? The truth, it turns out, unfolded slowly and without any single dramatic moment. To trace it properly, you have to begin with the species that endured longer than any other human line, Homo erectus. This species appeared on Earth approximately 2 million years ago, and the scale of that number is almost impossible to absorb. Every achievement humanity can point to, every city constructed, every language spoken, every war fought, every piece of art ever created, all of it fits within the last few thousand years. Homo erectus walked this planet for a duration so immense that our entire recorded history amounts to nothing more than a closing paragraph in their story. Their physical form was the first in the human lineage to carry a recognizably modern silhouette, long legs built for covering ground, shorter arms, a frame suited to open landscapes and long-distance movement. They appear to have been the first humans to leave the African continent and push into Asia and Europe, which means they learned to survive in climates and environments that had never shaped their ancestors. Their brains were considerably smaller than ours, yet dramatically larger than anything that preceded them in the fossil record, and they crafted stone tools that remained largely unchanged for hundreds of thousands of years. That consistency is often mistaken for mental limitation, but it suggests something closer to the opposite. Their tools functioned so effectively that there was simply no pressure to redesign them. In their final period, however, the world had shifted in ways that left them behind. Their remaining populations were stranded on the island of Java in what is now Indonesia, cut off from other groups, with no new territory available. The forests that had sustained them began to thin. The animals they hunted grew scarce. Without the numbers needed to recover or the space required to adapt, a species that had survived for nearly 2 million years quietly ran out of road. Their last known fossils date to roughly 110,000 years ago. After outlasting every environmental challenge the planet could produce, Homo erectus was gone. No species in the human family has suffered more from misrepresentation than the Neanderthals. For much of modern history, the image attached to them was one of slow, dim, lumbering creatures barely capable of thought. That portrayal was always inaccurate, and the more evidence researchers uncover, the more thoroughly it collapses. Neanderthals were engineered for survival in conditions that would be genuinely life-threatening for most people alive today. Their bodies were dense and powerful, broad through the chest, thick-boned, with arms capable of tremendous force. Their facial structures included prominent brow ridges and large nasal passages, specifically suited to warming frigid air before it entered their lungs. Their brains were, on average, marginally larger than those of modern humans. They pursued large and dangerous animals at close quarters, and the injury patterns recorded in their skeletons closely resemble those found in people who work with dangerous livestock today. They mastered fire, developed sophisticated stone tools, and an expanding body of evidence suggests they buried their dead with deliberate care. Neanderthals occupied Europe and Western Asia for over 300,000 years. Around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began moving into those same territories, and for a period of several thousand years, both species shared the same regions. Genetic analysis confirms that they interbred, and traces of Neanderthal DNA survive in modern human populations today. But coexistence with Homo sapiens introduced pressures the Neanderthals had never faced. Both species competed for the same animals and the same landscapes. Homo sapiens operated in larger social groups and maintained wider networks that allowed information, resources, and support to travel across vast distances. Neanderthals, by contrast, lived in smaller and more isolated communities, which made recovery from hard seasons or disease far more difficult. Layered on top of this was a climate that would not stay still, shifting back and forth between cold and warm phases, constantly rearranging the environments both species depended on. Neanderthal populations shrank and fragmented, and the genetic record reflects critically low diversity, a signal that their numbers had already been declining for some time. By around 40,000 years ago, they had vanished from the fossil record entirely. No single catastrophe ended them. Instead, a combination of competition, climatic instability, and dwindling population size gradually removed every foothold they had. The Denisovans occupy a category unlike any other species in the story because we can barely confirm they existed at all. The entire discovery rests on a finger bone recovered from a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, a fragment so small it could rest comfortably in an open palm. When scientists managed to extract DNA from it, the genetic sequence matched nothing on record. It was not Neanderthal, not Homo sapiens, and not any other species previously identified. It was something entirely separate, a branch of the human family that had been invisible to researchers until that moment. In the years since, only a small number of additional remains have surfaced, a few teeth and a piece of jawbone found at altitude on the Tibetan Plateau. That is nearly the full extent of what the physical record contains. And yet the genetic shadow they left behind is striking. Denisovan ancestry appears in modern populations across parts of Asia and Oceania, with some communities in Melanesia carrying as much as 6% Denisovan DNA. Tibetan populations inherited a specific genetic variant from the Denisovans, a gene known as EPS1, that enables the human body to function at extreme elevations where most people would begin to deteriorate from oxygen deprivation. A species that left almost no physical trace continues to shape how living humans survive on some of the highest ground on the planet. As a living population, though, the Denisovans faded out approximately 30,000 years ago. Their range may have stretched across enormous distances, but their actual numbers were likely thin, and populations that are too spread thin rarely survive when the world underneath them starts to shift. The final species in this account belongs to one of the most unexpected chapters in the entire history of human discovery. In 2003, on the Indonesian island of Flores, researchers uncovered the remains of a human being unlike anything the scientific community had encountered before. The individual stood roughly a meter tall and possessed a brain approximately the size of a grapefruit. The initial reaction from much of the scientific world was deep skepticism. Many researchers argued the remains belonged to a modern human affected by a disease or developmental disorder that had distorted the skeleton. But as more physical evidence came to light, it became impossible to maintain that position. These remains belong to a completely separate human species, now designated Homo floresiensis. This small human shared the island of Flores with Komodo dragons, oversized storks, and miniaturized elephants. Island environments frequently push evolution in directions that would never occur on a continent. When a species becomes isolated for extended periods, it may shrink if food is limited, or grow if predation pressure changes. Homo floresiensis may represent the most dramatic expression of this process anywhere in the human family. Their fossils span a period from roughly 100,000 to 60,000 years ago, and associated stone tools suggest they may have persisted until around 50,000 years ago. That timing coincides with the period when Homo sapiens was spreading through the region. What unfolded between the two species on that small island remains unknown, but islands offer little room to escape new pressures. A small population with nowhere to retreat can disappear without requiring anything that looks like a dramatic event. So, how did it come to pass that we are the only human species left? Intelligence is the answer most people reach for first, but it loses coherence quickly under examination. Neanderthals were intelligent. Denisovans adapted to environments at the edge of human physiological limits. Homo erectus outlasted our entire species' existence several times over. Homo floresiensis survived on an island full of hazards that would overwhelm most modern humans. Raw intelligence was clearly not the dividing factor. What may have set Homo sapiens apart was something considerably harder to observe and measure: the capacity to build and maintain connections across distance. Our species did not simply live in groups. We built networks. Tools, strategies, and knowledge moved between separate communities in ways that appear not to have occurred with other species at the same speed or geographic scale. When a group was struck by disaster, the knowledge that group had accumulated did not necessarily vanish with them. It had already moved outward into other hands. When climate change rendered entire regions uninhabitable, Homo sapiens possessed the social infrastructure to reorganize and relocate because no single place or strategy had become irreplaceable. But even this only accounts for part of the outcome. Geography, timing, and the fortunate coincidence of having enough people in the right places at critical moments all contributed as well. There was no guarantee written into the structure of the world that we would be the species still standing. We simply turned out to be. The other humans who once shared this planet were not early or incomplete drafts of us. They were not stepping stones on a path leading to Homo sapiens. They were independent forms of human life, each with their own way of reading the world and surviving in it. Homo erectus persisted for close to 2 million years before disappearing. Neanderthals endured hundreds of thousands of years of ice age conditions before vanishing. The Denisovans left almost nothing in the ground, yet their genetic contributions remain detectable in living people today. For most of the time that anything recognizable as human has existed on Earth, we were one branch among many. Now, for reasons that are never quite as clean or simple as we would like them to be, we are the only one left.